The title on the rusted door was half-flaked paint, Devil's Creek AUX Relay, Miles 17. The door didn't want to open in the crosswind, snow shouldered in through the frame as if the weather had decided it lived here, not us. Mara planted her boot against the lower hinge and shoved. The door scraped over a drift, coughed out a decades-old smell of hot dust, old mice, oil. My flashlight found the breaker cabinet on the far wall, a bank of gray metal squares with black toggles and a Bakelite voltmeter stuck at a slant. "Cozy," Mara said, putting her shoulder to the door until the latch caught. Wind flattened against the tin walls, hammering like a fist trying to come back in. "Remind me why this substation isn't condemned." "Because the county still uses it," I said. My breath made a cloud in the beam. "And because the new repeater on the ridge won't go up until spring." I kicked a coil of ruined cokes aside. "Get the radio. Let's see if we can hear dispatch." She set our backpack on the steel desk and pulled out the mobile, the kind we use in brush trucks when towers go dark. She twisted the volume. The speaker hissed, then buried a voice in snow. Behind that, something else ticked, dry and quick. I didn't notice it at first because the wind wanted to be the only sound in the room. Then a relay clicked, not the slow satisfying thunk of old equipment but a delicate, insect-bright tap. Something in the far panel double-clicked, like a metronome catching its own tail. Mara frowned. "That's supposed to do that?" "Old gear gets chatty," I said, lying, because the sound didn't belong to any relay I knew. Our power was running off a sputtering diesel in the shed out back. The amber tower light over the desk flickered like a tired eyelid. Paint bubbled on the cabinet doors where someone had set a space heater too close years ago. Over the desk hung an aluminum clipboard with a cracked plastic cover that had yellows bled into it from nicotine and time. Handwritten in neat block letters on a cigarette-burned index card. 1. Don't look at the windows after 3:17. 2. Keep radio volume at 2. Never 0. Never above 3. 3. If the relay double-clicks, sit very still for 60 seconds. 4. Do not wipe the condensation. 5. If the phone rings and there's no number, do not answer. 6. If you hear clicking from more than one direction, you are not alone. 7. Firelight must not go out. The card had small grease-ovalied fingerprints pressed into the corners. Someone had handled this a lot. Someone who, by all evidence, had been both patient and afraid. "Cute," Mara said. "A scavenger hunt." "It's probably a prank," I said, and felt how nervous that sounded. She clicked her tongue. "Or the world's saddest OSHA poster." "Radio at 2, huh?" She turned the knurled knob. 2 was quiet enough to make you lean in, loud enough to know you were not completely alone. The speaker whispered. Underneath, the relay whispered back from the dark panel, a double click like porcelain teeth. A minute later she found dispatch under all that snow. "County, this is Ranger Mara Beltran at Miles 17 Relay, over," and the dispatcher's voice slid through like a fish under ice, speaking our call signs, weather advisories, nothing that felt like relief. The wind shoved down on the roof and the whole building took a breath hard enough to lift dust, then settled. Something made the amber tower light flutter harder. My flashlight thinned to gray. I went for the generator shed with a fuel can and 3 inches of snow in my collar and came back with diesel under my nails. The relay room had warmed just enough to fog the bottom edge of the window panes. Not from the wind. From us. Mara's hand drifted toward the glass with a sleeve to wipe it cleaner. "Don't," I said. She lowered her arm. A smile flicked at the corner of her mouth, not because she thought the rule meant anything, but because she heard the edge in my voice and decided not to test it right then. The first small violation came without drama. At 22:17, I forgot and turned the radio up to 3 because dispatch's voice had gone faint. I left it there for 10 minutes until the relay cabinet, the same far one, double-clicked with that delicate insistence, the way a smoke alarm chirps at 2 in the morning. We both froze. The sound repeated. Tap tap. Then nothing. The amber light steadied. A thin stream of condensation ran down the inside of the window like a finger had made it. I hate this building, Mara said. We fixed the transfer switch, we're out of here by noon tomorrow, I said, as if noon meant anything, as if it could still be a shield. By midnight the wind had changed to small, hard snow that the beam of the tower light turned into a field of insects. I adjusted the wick on the kerosene lantern until the flame didn't chatter. The lantern glass haloed with breath just above the rim. There are only 4 rules that matter, Mara said, counting off our card with her lips. Windows. Radio volume. Don't move on double-click. Don't wipe the glass. And the phone, I said. I hadn't seen a phone. Then I saw it, a red wall phone behind the breaker cabinet, the kind you get from catalogs in 1987. No cord to the outside world, not one I could see. And yet the handset cradle had grease-dark gloss in the shape of many hands. Who exactly do you think calls this place? The generator coughed again like it didn't love the cold. The relays murmured back. I imagined the whole grid out there, buried lines and cheap poles down among the spruce, old wire that remembered every storm, every fire, every time a human hand introduced a piece it did not understand. At 1:03, I did what rules make you do, I started making a map. What we could touch without consequence. What acted strange. What belonged to nobody. Harms, wind, present, dumb, relays, present, not dumb, windows, listening, phone, hungry, radio, narrow lane. Safe, fire, for now, desk, for now, door, for now, each other, for now. At 2:04, the relay double-clicked again, the sound fine as a knitting needle on glass. We stopped breathing out of reflex. I counted to 60 with my eyes on the amber tower light. It wavered, steadied, wavered. Somewhere under our breath, under the building's breath, the phone line in the wall woke up like a muscle stretches in sleep. At 2:15, something tapped the outer door exactly once. Not a knuckle. Not wood. Something that made a hollow ring, like a coin on a pan. Then another. Then nothing. Then, muffled and far like a radio that wanted to be let in, a series of quick clicks out past the wall. A pattern that knew it was a pattern. Mara leaned toward the door with her head cocked like she was listening to a trapped animal. Tell me you brought a pistol, she said. Tell me you brought one. We brought a radio. And rules, I said. At 2:50, the amber tower light dimmed to a color like old tea. My lantern burned steady. The windows milky fogged halfway up in a slow tide from our heat. The generator's note thickened into a gurgle. The relays ticked in 1s and 2s. The building took a slow breath. At 2:59, the red phone rang. It was a sound that did not belong to this decade. A bell, not a digital chirp. The kind of ring that happens in movies, the kind that assumes a person will always answer and the person on the other end will always be human. The card's 5th rule stared at me in block letters. 5. If the phone rings and there's no number, do not answer. No number, Mara said, staring at the empty cradle display. Of course there was no display. This phone would never show a number, not in any world it was made for. The bell rang again. She looked at me. You going to pick it up and make a speech about how we don't scare easy? I shook my head. The bell rang a 3rd time. We let it. When it stopped, the relay cabinet double-clicked with the neat finality of a door locking. Then from the wall to our left, something answered the phone's idea of itself, a fast, dry tapping that came from 3 places in the room at once, overlapping like a conversation where nobody is patient. The delivered message was velocity, too quick to be fingers. I found myself holding my breath like the room had decided oxygen belonged to it for a minute. At 3:01, Mara said, Rule 4 is stupid. I can't see what's outside. She wiped a circle on the window with her sleeve. The cloth squealed softly. She leaned to the glass. "What do you see?" I asked. She stood that way a second, then turned her head a fraction. "My reflection." "Don't. Hold on," she whispered. I stood behind her and looked where she looked. Beyond the fogged glass, the amber tower light found snow and then more snow, black trees, the vague outline of the generator shed hunched under a frost-furred roof. Our reflection sat in the glass as a ghost of the room, faint, obedient to us. Then my reflection inhaled at the wrong time. I didn't, not then. The me in the window did. I saw my shoulders move in the pain and not in my coat. Then in that same wrong glass, in the upper corner where condensation turned to frost, an oval appeared for the briefest second as if breath had bloomed there and then been ashamed of itself. A mirror breath, but taller than both of us. Mara took a step back without choosing to. The relay panel double-clicked. Click click. We went still. Somewhere outside, in the angle between generator shed and wall, clicks answered and moved, tiny fast instruments measuring the snow. At 3:17 exactly, because of course there was a clock in this place and of course we were looking at it, the amber tower light blinked once. Not a flicker. A blink. It went out for the length of a blink and came back. The red phone took a breath down the line like a person about to speak. The card on the clipboard had written it. 1. Don't look at the windows after 3:17. We did not. Rule following has its own animal dignity. We stood with our eyes on the floor paint and on each other and on the tower light and on the analog clock hand scooting like it was tired. We let the window be the window. Behind us, something made a sound on the glass like wet glove leather moving on a clean plate. Is it writing? Mara said, like you say into a church when you know better. Don't look. She didn't. Her jaw worked like she needed to swallow something with no water in her mouth. At 3:19, the phone rang again. It rang twice. We did not answer. The relay double-clicked. I counted 60. The building exhaled. The amber tower light steadied. At 3:24, we broke the second rule on purpose. The radio volume slipped a hair past 2 while Mara thumbed the transmit, and the hiss from the speaker changed timbre not by much but enough that the relays all agreed to have an opinion. It was immediate, they clicked one after the other in sequence, circuitry of a thing we could not draw on paper, a rhythm that found itself in the walls, then in the window frame, then in the door. Turn it down, I said, and she did. The clicks faded. One hung on, like an argument that wants the last word. Then that too softened. What do you think it wants? She asked. Order, I said, before I had time to filter it, and knew I was right and hated that. It wants what the grid wants. Predictability. At 3:30, my lantern flame fuzzed at the edges as if cold had found a new way to be a gas and dissolve in kerosene. I opened the little glass door and trimmed the wick. I did not wipe the condensation that had beaded on the lantern. I did not look at the window where I felt writing change itself. I did not look at the red phone. At 3:46, something outside moved wrong. Not like a person in boots. Not like an animal. Not like wind. Snow drifted past the window, and behind that soft fall walked 3 thin brightnesses. Not lights. They were absence of dark, as if the space they took up did not owe the night a debt. They moved with a stop and start that made my brain want to stutter. We did not look. We listened. The clicks had a new direction now, a triangle from the corner by the generator, the wall behind the desk, and the door. It was not random. The timbre of each point's click was different, like someone using different spoons on different cups. The pattern traveled between them. It established a rule before we got a chance to fail it. At 4:02, a hard knock rattled the door in its frame, single and flat. We did not open. The phone rang once. We did not answer. The radio hissed. I pressed the transmit and sent air. Something on the other side of the wall clicked back as if mocking the shape of our language. I let the button go. What if it's not external? Mara said. Her voice was all quiet plans. What if it's just mapped through this place? A room that teaches you how to sit. I missed the forest a second. The idea that we could unbolt the door and just walk into trees and not be told what number to set the world to. I missed it so hard it ached in my fingertips. At dawn, which in this weather was a light that could have been a rumor, we tried the shed. Generator was healthy enough, if surly. Fuel was good. The tracks around the building were continuous drift. No prints, unless you counted long, shallow wave marks that looked like something had dragged a rake in a circle around the foundation. The window showed a shape we'd made by standing still, two faint silhouettes in the fog. Between them, very high up, a third had bloomed and vanished and left long fingers of clearer glass like reading. Inside, the card on the clipboard had changed. It had not. Of course it had not. But none of us could swear that small smudges weren't new, that the corner wasn't darker, that a letter had not thickened itself. I found a pencil and turned the card over. On the back, where you'd expect nothing, someone had written a ninth thing and then scratched most of it out. I held it to the lantern and read what hadn't been obliterated. 8. Do not correct their timing. They will try to borrow yours. Great. So we were clocks now. By 10, the road was a white rope buried thigh-deep. The county plow wasn't going to hit mile 17 until afternoon. We were committed to principles. We reviewed them until they had weighed in my head like tools. Volume at 2. No looking at glass after the time. Sit still when it double-clicked. Don't wipe breath. Don't answer red ghosts. We made coffee with a camp stove on the concrete, the flame low. Steam found the ceiling and turned to frost on the bolts. The relays watched. You can hear watching if you've been in enough machinery rooms. At noon, the radio got chatty with disturbances on line 6 and a transformer humming wrong at the school bus yard. On our end the hiss stayed precise, the rhythm of a very patient ocean. When it went wrong, it did it politely. At 14:12, the relay double-clicked. We sat still. The phone rang twice. We did not answer. The radio hissed. The amber tower light stayed itself. The clicks outside were a chorus of spoons again. Then the generator changed pitch mid-breath. Not a stall. Not a surge. A correction. In that new, exact quiet, the room measured us. The relay double-clicked again, a faster pair this time. I did not think first. I obeyed. I stilled. That was the second we should have stayed statues in. Mara didn't. She bent to trim the lantern wick with the small hook I'd used an hour ago. The metal on metal made a whisper. One bright click from the wall like a bell hammered under snow. Then silence. Then the lantern flame flared on its own, a slow swell like a heartbeat that had missed a beat. For a moment the room glowed too warm. The frost on the bolts became water. Then everything went back to right. The consequence took 10 minutes to reveal itself. Mara's voice rasped like she'd been yelling. She hadn't. She touched her throat and winced. Static, she said, like she meant it literally. Say that again. She did, but nothing in the meaning came out. The rhythm of her words was there, the hand motions, the eyes, the sounds were wrong, like a recording played through a fan and filtered through ice. She tried again. She pantomimed the wick. She wrote on the clipboard card margin, pen tearing paper with impatience. Don't move when double click. One violation, I said. She nodded. One consequence. She nodded again, a little hard, angry at the fairness of it. We taped a scarf around her throat. Her breath wanted to unspool into the room and write on the glass without her permission. The relays clicked to themselves, a sound like satisfaction that machinery should not know. At 1640, the road radioed that plows were westbound from mile 25. The red phone did not ring. The windows sweated like we were a couple of animals in a truck. The amber light paraded between dim and a little less dim. The pattern held until dusk, and then rule logic wanted its due. The list didn't say anything about the door. It didn't have to. The door was a window that forgot itself. At 1807, something tapped the door once and then made the kind of patient scrape metal makes when a person drags a file across it, slow and gentle. I imagined a long hand tasting the latch. The relay double-clicked. We sat still. When the minute ended, I stood, not because a new rule had been invented but because the old ones were starting to multiply like rabbits and we needed to cut off their food. "We can leave by the generator shed," I said. "The back. Out the fence, down to the creek, around the cutbank to the plow line. It's only 200 yards to where the road bends and there'll be ruts we can follow. We break line of sight with the building. We stop belonging to its acoustics." Mara wrote, in a hand made ugly by the scarf and the cold and the insult to her throat, "What about the windows rule?" "Does not apply outdoors," I said, and knew I was bargaining with a logic that did not care what rooms were, only what frames were. We packed stupid light. Radio. Lantern. The card. A wool blanket. I took the red phone off its cradle and set it on the floor like a superstition. I turned the radio volume to 2 and counted to 100 before touching the door. It was warm like someone was leaning on it from the other side and exhaling, then cold, then nothing. We opened it on a world made of field of snow, a sky the color of old paper, a stand of black spruce, their trunks straight as pencils. The snow swallowed our boots to midshin. The shed crouched in a bedroom of drift. Beyond the fence a drainage cut glossed with a thin skin of ice, not trustworthy. We followed the fence to its corner, forced a gap, slid into it sideways. The wind had chosen silence. It does that once or twice a winter to show you its other repertoire. Under that quiet, clicks traveled through the trees like rain moving on a tin roof 2 properties over. They moved with us. We did not look at the substation windows. We did not look at the amber light. We did not wipe our faces when frost gathered on our lashes. We kept the radio at 2. It hissed, faithful. The lantern gave us a slice of human yellow. At the cutbank the snow had drifted to a slope like cake frosting, easy enough to slide down on your back if you didn't mind cold sneaking under your shirt. We minded. We picked a footing where willow sticks poked like bad hair and we went down sideways, lantern held high. At the bottom the creek pretended stillness. Ice murmured. A dark seam opened where current had eaten. The clicks from the trees coordinated in 3 directions and then moved ahead, as if they were laying a path we could be fooled into believing we chose. At the road, low plow ridges hunched and the middle was a hard pack under a skin. I could have cried from love for that ugly work of a county grader. West was a curve into trees. East was a slope down toward the flats and the black smudge of the highway 4 miles away. We turned east. The clicks closed behind us, a soft fencing. At mile 16 the radio said in a voice that was not dispatch, "Keep your volume at 2. Mara stopped like she'd stepped on glass. She looked at me. I looked at the radio. The hiss remained hiss. The voice had not fuzzed into any memory of the dispatcher. It was my voice. The timbre. The vowels made in my mouth. I hadn't spoken. The radio used my sound to make a rule at me. "Borrowing timing," I said, remembering the scratched-out 8th rule. "Not just ours. Our punctuation." We kept walking. We did not answer. The clicks followed in trees parallel with us. They made a mirror of our pace. They did not need feet. They used the structure of the forest the way radio uses sky. The lantern flame burned calm, which did not comfort me. At mile 15, Mara stumbled. Not a fall. A wedge of road ice, sudden, malicious. She caught herself on one knee. The relay double-clicked behind my ribs as if I were the equipment. I froze. She did not have to. She was not the one the timing had asked anything of. She forced herself still beside me. The minute had the length of a bad song. When it ended, every tree in the stand to our left dropped a handful of snow in a rolling hush like applause. We made it 3 more bends before the road's logic and the substation's logic stopped pretending they had nothing to do with each other. The amber light at mile 17 watched from a notch. The radio said in my voice, "Do not look at the windows after 317, and then in hers, "A rough whistle through cloth, volume 2, and then in a third voice that belonged to someone who had written the card a long time ago and smoked while doing it, "Do not correct their timing." The snow told us the truth the way cold tells you you're mortal. We were not leaving. Not by road. Not by creek. We could walk until dawn and the mile marker would change and the rules would move with us like weather. People think the country is empty. It is filled with systems. Some of them are ours. We turned back. It felt like choosing to drown in a bathtub you own. We walked uphill until the amber light was again above and the shed crouched like a dog that has done something wrong, and the door, when I put my hand on it, was warm. Inside the room the condensation on the window had been arranged. Not letters. Not a drawing. A sequence of circles, small and large, like clock faces. In each, a mark. 12 o'clock, 3, 6, 9, and 2 more added where they had no business, at odd minutes, at a human breathing rate. We did not look long. We did not measure. New snow fell off the eaves when the building exhaled. The red phone rang once. The relay double-clicked. I sat. Mara sat. The lantern found a low tick in the wick and sang to it. Our radio hissed at volume 2. The card's rules did not change. They did not need to. The building had learned us. We slept in turns. You don't sleep in rooms like this, you blink long and then pretend you knew you were doing that. In my blinks, the clicks turned to a particular conversation like chess commentary. Tap tap. Pause. Tap. Pause. Double tap. Somewhere behind the left wall there was now a space that remembered someone else's heat. The windows held us in a hand where breath marks were prints. At 3:12 the second night, the phone rang. We did not answer. At 3:17 the amber light blinked once. We did not look at the windows. At 3:19, a hand, longer than ours, jointed wrong, pressed against the tent of condensation, 5 pads spaced like a star, and tracked down as if reading. We did not wipe. At 3:22, the relay double-clicked. We sat. At 3:25 the generator changed pitch, then corrected. We corrected nothing. We outwaited it until dawn gave the snow blue edges. By 10 o'clock, the radio said plows were on the highway, and a voice that belonged to a human asked if anyone was at mile 17 and if anyone needed a pull. We answered in words, not rules. We left the room stripped of our fingerprints and our breath as well as we could without breaking Rule 4. At the door, I put the card back on its clip. I added nothing to it. I did not scratch anything out. I do not believe in hope as an instruction, it fails people who don't get any. I believe in the fact that a relay makes a sound when it wants your body to stop moving. The plowman had a face like old wood and a thermos he'd fill with anything that burned. He didn't want our story. He wanted the chain on our axle and the weight of our thanks. He glanced once at the amber light, the way men glance at windows at night for reasons they don't say. We bounced through ruts behind him like children and watched the stand of spruce make a black-laced edge on distance. The radio hissed at 2. We turned it up at the county line. We were not punished. The rules live where they're written. At home, I made coffee at a volume my kitchen has never cared about. I steamed the windows because that's what happens when you have a human life inside a small box in winter. The largest pane over the sink fogged to its edges. I thought I'd feel brave enough to wipe it. I didn't. Instead I left a circle of steam where my breath had touched the glass and watched it purl and fall. The sound the furnace relay made when it turned itself on was a punctual thunk, not a delicate click. I stood still for no reason and felt foolish and didn't move for a count of 60 anyway. The phone on the wall is cordless, plastic, anonymous. When it rang, because life loves a joke, it showed my mother's name. I answered. We talked about weather. She told me to drive careful in the next storm. I promised. The furnace thunked off. The kitchen held its warmth like a hand holds a small animal without meaning to capture it. When I went to the sink for more water, there was a mark on the window where I could have sworn I had not touched. Not letters. A small circle with a line at 2, like a clock half remembering something. I breathed on the glass and watched it not change. That night I kept the radio on in the living room, volume at 2, because 2 happens to be the number that lets you hear the spaces between stations where the human world is quiet. Somewhere behind that hush you can hear systems taking their turns, tapping on the frames of rooms they have learned. I slept on the couch with the light over the stove making a little fire of its own. At 3:17, in my dreams or not, the world blinked. I did not look at the window. The relay in the furnace double-clicked when it came back on. I did not move. The radio breathed, a fine ceramic hiss, and I counted to 60 with my eyes closed, a human timing no machine had the right to borrow. By noon the next day, my phone remembered work. The county wanted a report, the kind where you list parts used and hours billed and describe weather in words that make lawyers sleep. I wrote, transfer switch diag, pending. ENV, blowing snow. Access, poor. I left out, the room had a voice and it wasn't ours. Mara texted from the clinic. Her throat came up clean on the scope, no lesions, no strain, no reason. Voice is back when I whisper, she wrote. When I try to talk like a person, it scrapes. Doctor said probably just cold dry air. I didn't explain metronomes that don't exist. We met that evening at the county yard, in the lunchroom that smells like hand cleaner and diesel. The heater bleated hot air that you could hold your palms in front of and lie to yourself with. Ken Hughes, who has fixed lines longer than I've been a person who needs to, set down a binder so old the rings snapped like arthritic knuckles. The cover said AUX relay sites, incident logs. You didn't tell me we had incidents, I said. You didn't ask, he said, and pushed the binder across. Mile 17's a special one. The old-timers called it the chapel. Why? Mara rasped. Her voice had the texture of radio snow on velvet. You sit down in there and you learn about yourself, Ken said. And there are rules if you want to walk out with all your same pieces. He tapped the binder. Don't look at the windows after such and such. Keep the volume at 2. Don't ever try for silence. Don't ever try to drown it. You knew, I said, and did not keep the accusation out of the way I said it. He held up a half-open hand. I knew enough to keep green kids out unless I went with them. But the county is cheap and the roads were bad and you had a radio. You came back. That makes you old enough to read this. We went through the logs like we were reading a history text for a war nobody declared. The first entry was a carbon copy sheet dated 1989, stamped with a rubber thing that bled ink, odd tapping coincident with phone ring, no dial tone, tech advised to ignore. Another, 1997, do not wipe the windows. The more you remove, the more it leaves for you. That's new, Mara said, pointing to our index card rule in the margin of a 2003 entry. Someone wrote it years ago. People add, Ken said. People scratch out. You'll notice no one ever erases. The stories got stranger only when they got precise. 2007, if 2 relays double-click in a row, move like you are underwater. If you cannot, expect to lose the word you are about to say and not get it back for a day. 2011, do not whistle. The room will think you are telling it a speed. 2015, if you are alone and the clicking starts from more than one wall, say your own name inside your mouth and do not release it. Something will say it for you if you do. What happens if we just shut the place down and scrap it? I asked. Ken looked at the ceiling like he'd asked the tiles this question before and the tiles had opinions. We tried, once. 2003, pulled the breakers, cut the feed, killed the tower light. A month later, 3 barns along the county line had red phones nobody wired and they rang at the same time in the night. Windows fogged in houses without heat. People don't like phenomena that follow them to bed. So we brought power back to where the rules live. Sometimes they deserve a church. So we leave it alone, I said. It felt like surrender. It felt like wisdom I didn't want to know the taste of. We take care of it, he said. We add what we learn. We don't evangelize. And if storms are in the forecast like they are next week, we make sure the place has fuel and the lantern has a wick. You don't want it improvising. We went back 3 days later with a truck full of things that know how to hold a rhythm, a cheap battery metronome with a broken case, a mechanical one with a chrome pendulum, a wind-up kitchen timer, a brass alarm clock that Ken said had woken his father for 40 years, and a wooden box with a tuning fork in it that someone had kept oiled and wrapped in a rag for reasons that felt like love. Don't bring digital, Ken said. Digital forgets how to be patient. We brought tape and wax paper for the windows and sheets of plastic for the floor and a little hand drill from before drills were loud. We brought lunch in tins and a thermos of coffee that smelled like a diner used to be. The road had been plowed into a philosophy by then, 2 tall white walls and a narrow single-lane catechism between. At the bend where the spruce make black fence pickets of themselves, the amber tower light of mile 17 winked through a veil of weather. The relay room's door stuck and then let go like a friend who goes along with your bad idea because they're not strong enough to stop you. Inside, the smell was ours and not ours, our coffee, our breath forever ago, that humid human algebra, and behind it something like coins washed clean. The index card still clung to its clip, the corner darkened into a brown thumbprint the way a page remembers hands. The red phone sat obediently in its cradle and made no promises. Volume 2, Ken said, before I put my hand on the radio. We did it by the book because the book had not killed us yet. The hiss began, surprised to be the first voice in the room again. We set the metronomes on the desk in a row and wound them to different tempos. Ken started the mechanical one last. The pendulum swung like an old man's answer to a young man's question. For a minute the room held itself like a breath. Relays do that right before a pump starts or a heater turns on, all those little waiting muscles, you can feel the power get ready to go from a thought to a thing. Then the far panel double-clicked, tap tap, and we all went still in the way the list had taught us to, holding our bodies like cups we didn't want to spill. The metronomes disagreed with each other in a way that was polite. The mechanical clock set a soft tin heartbeat. The kitchen timer made a stuttering insect sound as it counted down without being asked to. 2 minutes of that, then the room pushed back the way a body pushes a hand that is petting it the wrong direction. The metronomes slid a hair toward each other, tempos adjusting in tiny surrenders. The pendulum arced a fraction wider. The battery metronome hiccuped and corrected like it had remembered something it had not learned. Ken's eyes went sideways, he didn't smile, but there was an admiration there like you save for a hawk that goes about its business in front of you without acknowledging that you exist. They're borrowing timing, Mara wrote on her pad. She had her voice back when she spoke under breath, but writing had become a refuge. From each other. From us. From the room. We can give them bad timing, Ken said. He opened the wooden box and plucked the tuning fork with his nail. The note sat in the room like a line drawn with a straightedge. The metronomes argued with it and lost. The relay clicked. The note kept being itself. There's arrogance in physics and sometimes you need it on your side. We waited an hour. The rules did what rules do, they established a map of what was permitted and then tested its edges. The phone rang once. We did not answer. The amber light blinked at 3:17 exactly the way you blink at a deer in the ditch that you hope will not become a deer on your hood. We did not look at the windows. We watched a drop of water walk down the lantern glass and count for us. At 3:31 the timing games became a conversation. The far wall clicked twice in a rhythm we had not taught it, the door jamb picked it up and amended it, the desk took the measure and laid it under everything like a bass. Ken moved a metronome an inch to the left. The clicks followed. He moved it back. The clicks paused as if embarrassed to be caught in the open doing a child's trick. Mara wrote, "They want the lead. If we give it, they keep it. If we keep it, they take it if we get tired." So we refused to get tired. We sipped coffee that burned our tongues and ate ham sandwiches with the care of people performing an experiment. When the relay double-clicked, we still sat. When the phone rang without a number, we left it. When the radio begged to be louder, we stroked the volume knob like a dog we weren't going to feed and left it at 2. When condensation made the window into a soft white mirror that promised to show us something of ours, we looked at the floor and at each other and at the hinge pin on the door until our eyes watered. Around 4 the room offered an exchange. The metronomes were in lockstep now, even the cheap battery one that had no business being so dignified. The pendulum had found the precise beat that made the relay cabinet most satisfied. The clicks from the left wall had moderated into a teacher's patience. The red phone moved in its cradle a quarter inch like a horse testing a gate. "Do you hear that?" Mara whispered. Ken nodded. "It's asking if we'll put our hands on it. Tell it what the time is on purpose." "We won't," I said. "We might," Ken said, not arguing, just laying out futures so we could pick the one we wanted to be guilty of. He made us leave at dawn because that is how long you can do any hard thing before you stop being your best self. We left the metronomes in a staggered line like warning buoys. We taped the wax paper to the bottom of the windows and handed the building one more rule: if you want our breath, you can have it where we put it. The amber light watched us go with the even blink of a creature that neither loves nor hates you, just accepts your existence as a parameter. We came back the next day and the day after and built a grammar with the room. It's foolish to say it that way. It's the only way that fits. We made a list beside the old list, in pencil, because pencil knows that being changed is part of its job. 8. Do not correct their timing. They will try to borrow yours. 9. If metronomes begin to agree, separate them. If they agree again, let them. They are telling you how they count. 10. If you must look at the window, look at your own chest in it. If your breath is not your breath, stop. 11. If the radio speaks in your voice, answer in writing. 12. If you hear clicking from more than 3 directions, hum. Not a song, not a line. Just human noise. It will remind them you have a body. Day 4, the plowman, Earl, who had the thermos and face like old wood, came by and leaned in the door the way men do when there is a map on the table and they aren't sure they are allowed to advise. He listened with his head turned a little like sound comes better to one ear. "My granddad said this place used to be an M station and they never told anyone," he said. Said they used to play the farm report at 4 a.m., and you could hear it in the walls out by the creek. Said if you whistled the jingle, you got company. "We are not whistling anything," Ken said dryly. "Be ashamed to lose the relay," Earl said, not to us, not to the room, but to the order of things that holds plow routes and school schedules and funerals and coffee breaks in its hands like an egg. "But it's worse to have it wandering. We took that home like a talisman, keep it from wandering. It is the best you can do for systems that did not ask permission to be alive." In town the next week, the storm did what storms always do, came inconvenient, left a mess, made everyone discuss the morality of snow. I lay on my couch again because sleep had learned where to find me there. I set the radio at 2. I let the furnace thunk itself honest. At 3:17, the world blinked. The window made a sound like a thumb dragging down a cold glass. I did not look. The relay in my chest did the mercenary double-click it had learned from the relay in the wall. I sat. I counted to 60. The voice on the radio shivered into my mother's and then into mine and then into the dispatcher I know and then back to his. I went to the sink and filled a glass of water and did not look at the faint mark on the window where time was telling me it had opinions. Morning made coffee and lists. At the yard, Ken rolled out a paper map and pinned it with a wrench. "We do one more thing," he said. "We treat it like a neighbor. We bring it a proper clock." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we mount an old schoolhouse clock on the wall, mechanical, with a pendulum heavy enough to make the room think twice about taking it. We keep it wound. We let the room count with it. And we stop bringing our timing from our bodies. We bring it from a thing that can stop without dying. So we did that. We hung a clock that had a face like calm. The pendulum swung with the steadying stubbornness of someone who has decided to stand in a doorway and not let a fight in. The clicks adjusted around it. The radio learned to be a citizen. The red phone rang 3 times and then miraculously, like grace, stopped asking for us. The room is still itself. It will always be. There are nights when a hand prints itself on the window and reads downward as if learning cursive. I do not wipe it. There are days when the amber light blinks wrong at 3:17 and we ask ourselves who corrected whom. There are moments when Ken stands with his palm on the breaker cabinet like a priest laying a hand on a stubborn parishioner. We have not made anything safe. Safety is not a room you build. It is a choreography you can do without tearing a tendon. On a Friday after the January thaw, Ken did not come into the yard. His truck sat with its hood kissed by tire spray. There was a paper bag with 2 sandwiches in it. Earl came in late, hat still wet, and looked at me the way men who know winter look at the person who is supposed to notice absences. We drove to mile 17 without asking the weather what it wanted. The amber light blinked a greeting that felt like admitting we had been wrong to think we had taught anything to anything. Inside, the school clock had stopped. The pendulum hummed like a thought that hadn't been finished. The red phone was off the hook and resting on the desk as if someone had set it there to look for a pencil. The metronomes were aligned on the desk in a parade of small philosophies. The room was warm with human time. Ken sat on the concrete with his back to the far panel. His eyes were open and patient. His breath made a slow bloom on the window that read itself. He lifted one finger when we came in, not to hush us but to indicate that he was not done with a count and didn't want to lose his place. When he reached 60, he put his hand down. He stood up with the creaking dignity of a man who keeps his own house. "Clock stopped," he said. "It wanted me to finish. Did you?" Mara asked, voice a paper cut better than it had been, soft but hers. "I did," he said. "And then I told it I was going to wind the clock and it let me." He rubbed his knuckles with his thumb the way old injuries ask to be remembered. "It doesn't like a gap. It will fill a gap. That's not evil. That's a tendency. We filled the gaps. We wound the clock. We wrote on the index card in a small hand so as not to crowd history. 13, if the school clock stops, finish a count to 60 and wind it. Do not let it finish for you. 14, do not bring music. It will keep it. 15, if you must leave before dawn, leave a human breath in the corner by the door, speak one word at the empty wall, then go. It will occupy itself with that until morning. Earl stared at the line about music like a man who had once been young in a truck with friends and loud songs and who was not anymore. What happens if you bring music? He asked. Nothing, Ken said. And then something. And then you can't listen to that song without counting. And then you can't stop counting when the song ends. You speaking from experience? Earl asked. Ken smiled like a man smiles when he remembers a stupid miracle that cost him a month of sleep. From a mistake. Which is the only form of experience worth a name. Mara found the courage to ask the question we'd all circled like deer at a salt lick. Do we ever shut it down? Ken stared at the red phone like a person reads their own hands for news. Someday the county will build a new line and the room will become a room again. Maybe. Or maybe you'll move the rules with it. I can't tell you. I can tell you that there are other rooms. Mile 9 hums in summer. Mile 23 has a habit of knowing what you are going to ask before you ask it. And there's an old repeater in Millbrook that chews on names like they are mints. We keep lists. We keep clocks. We leave windows alone at certain hours. And we don't brag at the bar. We laugh the way you laugh when you are not going to do the last thing. We would brag to no one because we were putting this in the book and in the walls and in the clock. Let the brag be the beat that came back to us when we needed it. Spring ate the snow in the ungentle way it chews up ditches and roads and then pretends it had no part in what the thaw broke. The amber light looked wrong on fog mornings, more orange than amber, and we worried about the bulb until we remembered it did not need us to find its hue. Mara's voice came back the way a river returns to its bed. I stopped waking at 3:17 every night. I started waking at 3:16 and smiling at the stupidity of habits. There is a boy now, no, not a boy, a young man with shoulders like Ken had and a way of walking like Earl does when he thinks no one is watching, who works with us. He is careful in the lazy way that means he will be careful for real when it counts. He asked me last week why we keep the radio at 2, a genuine question. I told him, because 2 is where the county lives. He said okay, with the faith of a person who hasn't had to learn a rule twice. He will. Everyone does. That's why we keep the card. That's why the ink brown in the corners is always a new thumbprint pretending to be an old one. On a night in June when the world doesn't know how to get dark properly, I sat on my porch and listened to insects write their laws. The furnace was asleep, the fridge hummed like a neighbor singing to himself while he stacks wood. The radio on the table beside me breathed at 2 because I am superstitious and because superstition is just a way of telling yourself you have seen the pattern and chosen to cooperate. Somewhere down the block a motion light clicked, and for a second the whole street agreed on a tempo. It passed. It always does. 3 days later a letter came in a blue envelope with a print of a trout on it. The return address was an older hand. Inside was one index card with a list in a navy neatness I could have used to level a shelf. The card smelled faintly of a house that loves furniture polish. Rules for Millbrook Repeater, Summer Station, it said at the top. And beneath. 1. Do not call your own name. 2. Do not correct their weather. 3. If a song begins without you, do not harmonize. 4. If the windows sweat in circles, it means they are counting you. Walk slowly. Let them finish. 5. If the phone rings with no number, do not answer. Someone had underlined the phone line. Someone always does. I pinned it on the corkboard and wrote at the bottom, in our ballpoint, volume at 2. We share what we can. We leave what we can't in the places that can keep it. On the hottest night in July, a thunderstorm went through and made children in houses across town sit up in bed and decide whether they were allowed to be afraid. I stood at the window and didn't look at my face in it. The radio breathed. The house clock on the wall did its honest tick. The relay in the furnace made the right sound when it came on, and I sat for a minute without moving, not because I had to but because there is a peace in being a metronome the world cannot borrow from. The amber light at mile 17 winked through trees miles away where it could not possibly be, and I closed my eyes and pretended that wasn't true. When the county budget meeting in August came around, a line item had found its way onto the agenda: decommission AUX relay, mile 17. There were reasons attached: efficiency, the new repeater finally on the ridge, savings that matter to a county that buys library books and road salt with the same pocket. The boardroom had a clock on the wall that lied about being fast, the way people do when they want to be praised for earliness. Mara looked at me and I looked at Ken and Earl looked at the table and the young man with the careful lazy hands looked at the window like he could hear a ring that hadn't started yet. We said what we could say. We did not mention index cards. We mentioned weather. We mentioned line of sight. We mentioned redundancy and the human fondness for a backup that works when the thing that is supposed to work is on vacation. It did not matter. It shouldn't always matter. The world changes. Harder, sometimes, than the things you thought were hard. We drove to mile 17 the next morning with a chain, a permit, and a list that felt like a prayer. We took down the amber light because that is what you do when a place stops being a place you ask to watch over you. We unbolted the breaker panels with respect. We wound the school clock one last time and let it run down while we sat and counted to 60 at the end of its last swing. We took the red phone off the wall and locked it in the truck because Earl said he didn't want it riding back in the cab with him like a small dog that might choose the wrong time to bark. At 3:17, because we stayed to do the wrong thing at the right time, the building blinked. It did not have a light anymore. It blinked anyway. A breeze pushed through the room in a line that could have been a song and could have been the memory of one. The windows fogged at the edges in a shape that, if you were a person who wanted very much for the world to be simple, you would have called a mercy. We did not wipe it. We left the paper clock list on the clip with everything that had been added and scratched, a palimpsest of not dying. We shut the door and did not lock it. We told the room, out loud, that if it needed to count, it could count with the wind through the spruce and with the creek in spring and with the hands of people who would find themselves stopping for no reason at all in their kitchens at night and waiting for the number 60 to open like a gate. Back home, I turned my radio to 2 and listened as if for a voice that would say my name in mine. It didn't. It never does, not when you're ready. The window was clean and dumb and held the day's heat in the glass the way good windows do. The furnace thumped. The clock ticked. Somewhere in town a phone rang with no number, someone did not answer it. Somewhere else a man wiped a window because he hadn't been told not to and nothing happened to him because the world is not consistent and that is its only kindness. And sometimes, I will not pretend otherwise, sometimes at 3:17 my living room blinks and the radio steals my breath for one count, and I sit very still and let the count be what it is and refuse it the next one. Not because of fear. Because being human is choosing a tempo. Because sometimes you live by rules that are not laws, and sometimes you love a county enough to learn the difference. If you love chilling horror stories and eerie mysteries, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us every week for a new descent into darkness. Your next nightmare is just one click away.